Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth installment of the Aspen New Voices, Voices of Resilience podcast. I am your co-host, Rene Sparks, based in Cape Town, South Africa. And with me is Taha Sabri, who will introduce himself, as well as our amazing guest speaker today.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Taha Sabri. I'm a doctor with lived experience of mental illness, working in mental health in Pakistan. And I'm really excited today. We have another fellow, an amazing researcher, writer, speaker, and Desmond Jumbam. So he's based in Ghana currently, and he's a health policy consultant. And he's been doing some fantastic work with his current organization, as well as his foundation, the Jumbam Family Foundation. So without much further ado, I'll just go straight to our first question. So Desmond, when we were doing our background research, we saw a tweet of yours, which got around 2.5 million sort of views, and essentially it was I've never gotten like more than 10 sort of views. Say, how do you do it? And in that you talked about that how it started and how it's going, right? You should, a bit about your background and your current status. So tell us, how did the journey start, and how is it currently going?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that it's a pleasure, really an honor for me to be on your show. Yeah, that tweet, it just happened randomly. I can tell you how it happened. I was visiting Cameroon back home I think it was more than 2 years ago now. And I went to the neighborhood where my mom and I first lived when I came to Yaoundé, to the city, when I was 6 years old. I grew up with my grandparents until when I was 6, and my mom brought me to Yaoundé to live with her. She had gotten a job, and she wanted a better education for me. But this time when I went, I just wanted to reminisce and see where we grew up, where I grew up, and I saw the little shack, where my mom and I first lived, and I was just astounded. This was 1998, and I was just astounded at that is where we started, that little shack. And so I took a picture and I just sent it to a friend to say, man, we've come a long way. This is where we started. And he was just like, you should share that so that people know, because people, they see you where you are now, and they may assume that you're coming from a background of privilege, or they don't really know your story. And so I shared it on Twitter. That was when how it started, how it's going trend was still trending. And to my surprise, it got like 1,000 likes, and then 100,000, and I told my mom, I was like, something weird is happening, like, and then 1 million, and then 2 million likes, and I was just astounded. And I think people, there's a story there, they're just two pictures, but I think people just connected with the story of kind of hope and still. So the other picture was just an ID. So it was the shack and the ID of my Harvard badge, when I was an employee at Harvard for 3 years. And so that's how that tweet went. And apparently it's one of the most liked tweets of all time. So I'm up there with Barack Obama and whoever else.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think Obama must be quite pleased
to be with the likes of me compared.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I just want to come in here because you've mentioned now about how you have to add this caveat, and that was one of the things that struck me as we were going through who Desmond is. It was like, it's all about family. And so looking at this whole article that was even written about From Poverty to Harvard, I also came across like a fundraising page that was made by, I think, one of your colleagues or one of your friends. And it just struck me that you've got really a great support system and network, right? So again, I just want to commend you on that. Obviously, you're making sure that people know I didn't get here on my own, and that's fantastic. I'm going to also just continue with, as we tried peeling back the layers of who you are, I got a sense that you are deeply committed to equity, and then also sharing. For me, I just wanted to understand what kind of inspires you to keep going, because you're speaking about this, where I started out and where I am now, but just what keeps you going?
Yeah, that's a good question and a tough one. Yeah, I think a big part of it is the commitment to kind of improving things for other lives of others. I always part of the reason why that picture, like, I went back to my neighborhood, right? Because I want to be reminded of where I'm coming from and who I'm serving and what what a big purpose in my life is, which is to serve others. There's, when you look at the world, there's just so much pain and grief and suffering that it's really impossible to take it all in. And when you try to take it all in, it's almost crippling. And so I have to try to do what I can to alleviate as much suffering, as much pain, and try to improve lives for other people so that they can live flourishing lives as well. And so this is what has driven my work. And so, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a doctor, and then I discovered health policy because I wanted to have a broad impact.
So, but why?
So yeah.
In terms of why do you want to alleviate suffering, right? Because not everyone thinks that way. In fact, majority of people are indifferent to it. And sometimes indifference seems more pleasant, to be honest. But what shaped you? What experiences shaped you? What helped you see this truth that the purpose is to serve? So what helped?
I mean, it's so self-evident to me that it's almost hard to explain that why, because I mean, suffering is a bad thing, right? I think we can all agree to that. But I can also give a a story that has helped me to really think about the why. It's I mean, as you know, my mom and I started a foundation recently, the Jumbam Family Foundation, and that is to support victims and survivors of the ongoing war in Cameroon. And the reason we started that, which gets to my why, is because my father was killed in the war brutally, and when something like that happens, it forces you to think about what is the meaning of it all, and you have two options, in my view, when something like that happens. You have to choose despair. It's all meaningless. It's all, I mean, what's the point? But it was very painful for me too, because my dad, he started from nothing, and he was still struggling. He grew up in the village, and his dad, had many wives, and they had many siblings, and the odds of him getting an education was almost impossible. But he struggled and got scholarships and worked to get his undergraduate education, and then 2 masters, and then later on to get jobs. So his whole life was a struggle. And when he was killed, it was right around the time when it seems like things were about to pick up. I was doing okay. And he just got brutally taken out of existence. And so I struggled a lot with that. What do I do? do I just sink into my own despair about the meaninglessness of life and all of that, or do I choose hope? And so that's why my mom and I started this foundation. Is the quite honestly, the alternative to hope is hardly an option. It's hardly an option at all. And so you have to choose hope. You don't really have a choice especially when something horrible like that happens.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think your bravery in telling the story, and even just the legacy that you're helping to keep alive through the foundation that you and your mom have started is quite amazing. I saw that there's scholarships for people, and so there's really opportunity, and also support, mental health support for widows, and I take it for anyone else. But I thought that was really, really quite encouraging to see people going out there and taking their own pain and actually turning it into something as beautiful as this. So, well done.
Thank you.
So I suppose his legacy lives on in what you do.
Yeah, that's the hope. It's is that his legacy lives on. We have 5 scholars who have been affected by the crisis. They're all students. Since the crisis began, almost 300,000 students have been out of school in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon.
That's right.
And so we wanted to do what we can to offer an opportunity for them to continue their schools. And so we have 5 scholars, really impressive, amazing people who have, in spite of all this, continued to prioritize their education.
And I think another question that comes to my mind, I was just thinking about some of your work that I've read, and I remember this article on mental health that there's nothing un-African, in which you share very deeply personal experiences. And firstly, that's extremely brave. And I think the single most important act of reducing stigma is by sharing our own struggles. So I think that's really brave. So, so firstly, I just want to ask you 2 things about that. Firstly, how, it's a huge trauma to lose your father in that way. How did you cope with all of those feelings as you experience those symptoms and everything, and you got professional help? But what really helped you to come out of that?
So for some context for your viewers and listeners, like I mentioned earlier, my dad was killed in the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon, and it happened right at the start of COVID, so in March 2020, and I was in Ghana at the time, and it was also a very brutal killing. I mean, he was beheaded, and they made away with his head, so we ended up burying him without his head, and my mom never got to see her husband one last time before he was buried. And I was in Ghana. It was really a horrible experience because I couldn't travel to Cameroon, and there were lockdowns. So even those in Ghana, even my friends in Ghana, could not come visit me. And so when the news happened, I just was in my apartment for days upon days, alone, kind of processing and just trying to cope with it. So it's a horrible thing to grieve alone. It's not something that I would wish on anybody. But I also, I think I became obviously depressed, just not having that outlet, not having community around me. I don't think I went through a normal kind of grieving process. So a lot of it was kind of processing it internally. But what helped Taha was to have friends call me and support me, and family. It made a big difference. I mean, there were times when I didn't want to talk to them, but they would just call and like, or send me a message. Or I tried calling you, and we didn't. Or I had one friend who would just call and we would talk about nonsense. and that, that helped a lot. But I also got to a point where I sought a psychologist. I did not have like any, fear. Like I knew that I needed help. And perhaps that's because of, my exposure and, like I didn't have any problems with seeking mental help. So I got a psychologist, and he really helped me out. And part of it was just having somebody to think and process with and to. So that helped a lot. And I forget your second question was the suffering. Suffering, I think it's part of life. And I think the sooner we accept it as part of life in some ways, the more likely you're to be content. Not necessarily happy, but content. It doesn't mean we shouldn't work to alleviate suffering. We have to work to alleviate suffering. But even and suffering comes in different ways. Everybody ought to anticipate suffering at some point in their life. And the question is how you deal with suffering when it appears, when it shows its face. And I think part of me, that's what helped me, is I saw this as probably definitely the worst suffering of my life that I've experienced. And I spent a lot of time trying to process it, even while I was going through it, and just also experiencing it. I just experienced it as a horrible, horrible thing, and I'm still experiencing it.
Thank you for sharing that. And and suffering can even be an opportunity.
Absolutely.
To see, to grow,
and I think we actually grow the most in our suffering. That's when we learn the most about ourselves and others. Yeah.
During that time. So thank you for sharing that.
But yeah, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing this with us. During the search for who Desmond is, we did come across a blog, I think, that you shared around your writing. But then you'd also, on your website, you have a personal website, and on it you said memoirs was coming. So I really knew this was in the pipeline. And I think you kind of already touched on how you use writing to kind of share your own experiences. But what is it about your writing that you hope will kind of help shape the future? Because I know you spoke both about nonfiction and fiction, but what are you aiming to do with your writing?
Yeah, it's only recently that I somewhat confidently calling myself a writer. Calling us a writer is it's a big thing to carry, and being a writer doesn't just mean you write. It means you convey things to people in a powerful way, and it's also being vulnerable. Writing is a very vulnerable process, and so what I hope in my nonfiction writing, in my memoir, for example, what I hope to get out of that is to be able to share the stories of people who don't have a voice. Because until this happened to me, I couldn't imagine the trauma. I'd seen in the news that these things were happening in Cameroon, but until it happens to you, you can't really understand what those people are going through. And so I'm hoping to be able to somehow channel and share their story and share what they're going through, as much as I can. And also I think being a writer is a position of privilege. I must use my writing to seek justice. And that is one goal that that I want to use. Writing is very powerful. The other piece that I've written that I think has been the most impactful in my career so far is the satirical piece that I wrote in BMJ Global Health about how not to write about global health. And that was kind of unexpected. I was writing a similar article to what the Kenyan author Binyavanga Wanaina had written, How to Write About Africa. Really powerful piece. I read about it a long time ago. So I thought, oh, this definitely applies to global health. So I wrote a version of that for global health. And to my surprise, the article also went viral when it was published, and it was shared in Global Health and Research and Development. And it was, yeah.
And just to sort of talk about that a bit, Desmond. So is to share your views with our audience, because I really vibe with them as well. That how has, in your opinion, how has colonization, number one, shaped the health systems of the colonized nations, and how do these post-colonial attitudes continue to influence the development of health systems in the post-colonial countries?
Yeah, so I mean, I've given some talks on this, and I think it's important to understand our history and the way our health systems have developed and the way global health came to be, right? If we look at the origins of global health, it started with missionary kind of tropical medicine. There's some excellent articles that have been written around this. One that I think of is, came out of the Harvard School of Public Health, documenting why malaria is still a priority today, right? It was when the colonizers came to Africa, malaria was a significant barrier to them exploiting further into the interiors of Africa. A lot of the Africans had developed some kind of relative immunity to malaria, but it killed the colonizers in droves.
But they still
smallpox and all of these, and they brought their own gifts for us. But then a lot of research. They then invest a lot of research into malaria for their protection to allow them to exploit the African continent. And so malaria, and when the interventions were developed, drugs were developed, they did not really share it with the Africans. It was mostly for themselves to continue exploiting. So global health, even up till today, has taken on some of that manifestation. We look at many diseases. Oftentimes, the West invests in diseases, not necessarily for the good of the people, but they invest in diseases that are likely to jump over borders, to travel
to them, essentially.
Exactly. COVID-19 and Ebola and all of these things. So in a sense, there's still many manifestations of global health that persist. I've been in this space for less than 10 years, and I wrote that article, a few years ago. I was just astounded by how wrong we practice global health. Who has the power? The assumptions that we have about the direction of knowledge. Knowledge flows from up to down, from north to south. Students from Harvard and Northwestern or wherever come to Africa, and they lecture our ministers, and I'm just like, you don't know anything, right? So there are all these assumptions about who has the knowledge, who has the power, and access to funds that is inequitable.
Advocate over here, right? So
yes.
And I don't know if Cameroon shares a similar problem, but for example, in my country and in some others, those in power are corrupt and technically so they don't know anything. That's right. So that's also like, and that's how some of the reasons that our health systems are still not functioning even after 70 years of independence. Because those in power who do have brown or black skins, they're also corrupt. So the
Yeah.
criticism comes in that okay, fine, but if we actually hand over power to the ministries of health, won't those funds just be embezzled or just like wasted? I think that's also a very valid critique, no?
No, I agree. You have to critique it from both ends. We have a responsibility in the global south to fix our house, to get our things together. Quite honestly, there are many in leadership positions in low and middle income countries who would rather keep the system the way it is because they benefit from maintaining the colonial system in place. And funding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not as black and white as maybe I framed it earlier, but I agree with you. There are a lot of problems that we need to fix internally. When we say that there's inequitable research, for example, right, where high-income researchers just fly in but there has to be some kind of accomplice in the global south for that to happen, right?
Exactly.
Why would you accept to be put on a paper?
Yeah, it's like selling data of your people or treating them like guinea pigs for experiments that the people from high income countries can benefit from. So it's like participating in the colonial legacy. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I agree with you that we have to always examine the problem from one side. If we're looking at it purely from like it's a foreign problem, then it almost takes away our sense of agency. Like,
and self-accountability.
There is sense of accountability, exactly. But it is a problem, but we also have to hold our lawmakers accountable, hold those in power in the South accountable, because there are huge problems that need to be fixed internally.
Thank you.
I love this conversation. This I can speak about forever because we're in the same boat, same WhatsApp group. It's actually so sad because I'm constantly also writing about accountability, and it feels like it's a word now, like we're just putting it out there and we're not actually defining what that looks or should look like. And even when we do try to define it, it comes with a bit of a backlash. I know we had conversations around, no, let's tell funders to keep their money because we want to do things in a certain way. But if they were to do that, we wouldn't have specific programs. I'm thinking from a South African context. HIV, STIs, and TB is funded mainly by big funders or donors. So sometimes it feels like we're a bit cornered. It's a cycle. You were speaking about suffering. It feels like, well, actually, the health system's in the same group. In order to get somewhere, we need to kind of trade off. This is how it always feels. But I love the conversation around we actually have knowledge in Africa. We have knowledge in the global south, and yet we're not, kind of grabbing every opportunity. And what you are speaking about is actually look at those opportunities, get yourself out there, be part of the change. That's at least what I'm hearing. Thank you so much for that.
And we have resources. We have knowledge, but we also have resources. I mean, the amount of oil that is plundered in Nigeria, if that was properly managed, I mean, Nigeria would be a different country, right? And look at a place like DRC, the resources that are extracted out of DRC. If somehow we were able to, get our leaders to invest and to improve the systems, I think Botswana has done relatively well, in managing the diamonds and investing that in the country. But we do have the resources.
Yeah, it's about using them in a way which can benefit the nation instead of amassing wealth in Swiss bank accounts and leaving the country.
Yeah.
So, which is also encouraged by those in high income countries. Anyways, so thank you so much, Desmond. I think this was a lovely conversation. We're coming to the end of it, and I think what I would love for us to end with is the 4 principles that you speak about. We know we've read about those, but we won't. We will let you talk about them. So if you leave our audience with the 4 principles that you follow, which guide your path. So I think that that'll be great.
So yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about these 4 principles. The first principle is to always seek truth. It seems to me that truth is fundamental. Truth is important. Everything we do has to center around truth. So always seek truth. And it's a bit elusive sometimes, but never give up on it. The second is to do good. Again, to your question of why, that you asked at the beginning, I think it's almost self-evident that we have to alleviate suffering. And we all know what doing good looks like. It's inherent in all of us. And so always listen to that internal message telling you, you ought to do this for this person. So do good. The third is to be authentic. Be yourself. Don't live for others, or don't live for social media. Just be yourself. And finally, love. That requires that. I don't think that needs an explanation, but love your neighbor,